So thank you all for joining. It's been a few months since we had our last meetup, so I appreciate you all keeping your pulse on the meetup and showing up today. We had 4 talks planned. Unfortunately, the 4th talk, the guy got sick today and had to bail out. So we'll do 3 talks. Feel free to hold all your questions till the end. After the 3 talks, everyone that was speaking and the rest of the core SRE team will get up and we'll just kind of field some Q&A from everyone here that is in the audience. So with that, we will start with our first talk. I'm going to go ahead and introduce yourself and what you want to talk about.
Okay, hi, my name is Robert Armstrong, and I'm on the device reliability engineering team here at Netflix. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about sort of the context of our team, some of the tools we use, and how we get things done. So to get things started, I assume some of you maybe have Netflix. So I just wanted to know who watches Netflix mainly on like a Mac or a PC. Just raise your hand or shout Mac PC. Okay, so a bunch of people. Does anyone use a game console, like a PlayStation or Wii, Xbox? All right, so people also. And then how about a tablet, iOS or Android? All right. And then finally, who watches on a smart TV or a Blu-ray player or a Roku? So it's these devices that my team focuses on. So all of the other players, Mac PC, game consoles, and mobile Android iOS devices. These clients are developed by Netflix, and teams internally support them. So if an issue happens out in the field, those teams directly address them. The players on these devices are actually built by the manufacturers themselves using an SDK that we develop. And so my team focuses on supporting these. So, like I said, these devices are all built on a common Netflix-provided SDK. There's been 4 major versions released since 2008 when the first devices were introduced to the market. Minor versions are released every year. The partners implement the application. We help them in that process, but they really own the code and implement it. The devices all have unique features. So for DRM or video decoding, depending upon the platform, it may use its own specific technology. And then as the manufacturers are working to build these devices, before they can go to market, they have to go through a rigorous certification process. So we ensure that the DRM is secure, that the video decoding works, and that it passes a large battery of tests. So since 2008, we have over 1,000 different device models in market now. And then that results in tens of millions of different unique devices that are in people's homes today. So, and since then, Netflix continues to support all these devices. So there may be, a Blu-ray player from 2009 that somebody has, and as we're updating all of our software, the services in the back end, they need to continue to support these devices. So the mission of Device Reliability Engineering, my team, is to act as the voice of the customer for CE and MVPD devices, focusing on end consumer impacting issues. So, and note, MVPD is just an industry acronym for a cable company, basically. So we essentially help resolve issues that are specific to these devices. So 81 million, this is the current number of Netflix subscribers as of Q1 this year. We focus on a subset of those customers that use these devices. So here's one example. This is sort of a nice TV. Does anyone have one of these TVs? It's a $32,000 LG 4K TV. You can buy it. Netflix comes built in. This only has 160 reviews on Amazon, and it was released in 2015. So, there's only a certain number of these devices out in the market. Here's another device that we support that has a Netflix player. $100, 16,000 reviews on Amazon since 2014. So there's a lot more of these out there. Both of these devices run our SDK, but there's slight variations in them, and they're going to react differently to different parts of our service ecosystem, and may encounter different bugs or different issues as things evolve. So this is just kind of one of the challenges that we deal with in having to support sort of this wide array of devices at different scales that are out there. This is another example. So this graph represents two different devices and the number of active devices that are in field. So this green line is like a 2010 model. Sorry, I think it's like 2013. You can't buy it anymore. It's still out there, but it's actually in like a slow decline. So people are maybe just not using it anymore. They've upgraded it, things like that. The purple one is a new device that was launched in April 2016, and tons of people are buying it. So what are the issues we look for? So here's just some real quick examples. Customers actually sometimes take pictures or videos of things that they're seeing and send them into our tech support teams. A lot of them, they just pop up in the middle of a movie, 404 not found. They call into our tech support to figure out, how they can fix the issue. Something went wrong, please try again later. The errors are often not very helpful, and so we have to start digging in and figuring out what's actually going on in the back end. These are sort of the common issues that you probably would think of as people having trouble with their devices. We also look into other sort of deeper issues. Some of them are sort of specific to the quality of playback for customers. So rebuffers, that's when essentially the video network buffer in a device has run out of data. And it doesn't have anything to play. Normally our adaptive streaming algorithm tries to make sure that this will never happen, so it'll dynamically adjust the bit rate based on network conditions, such that you're always playing your video. But on a new device, potentially, that hasn't been optimized, or on somewhere where there's bad network conditions, you may actually get a lot of rebuffers, and that's something that we'll pay attention to and try to address. A quality stall is similar to a rebuffer, but you don't actually run out of data. It's just when the bit rate drops to such a point that the picture quality is really no good anymore. And it's also just something that we want our adaptive algorithm to always try to avoid. And then payment issues. So I think most people in the US probably just pay with credit card, although increasingly as we work with cable companies, and especially internationally, you can also bill to your cable provider. And when we do that, there's a custom integration there that needs that we work with, and so we monitor those as well. So our overall approach is you can divide it up into two categories. We work reactively and then proactively. So reactive is really based on alerts and customer support escalations. Alerts, we use real-time alerts. We use a system developed internally here at Netflix called Atlas. It's open source, and you can check it out. I think the brief description of it is a dimensional time series backend, and it's basically a metric system for aggregating metrics across all your systems and then letting you graph and slice and dice on them. And then we also have daily aggregate emails that we generate and send out with Tableau, and then lots of accompanying ETL in the background that kind of feeds data into them. We use those to highlight devices that have statistical outliers in the metrics that they output. And we typically use the daily aggregates over real time on metrics that would just have too much noise to do on real time. Then proactively, we do a few things. So we do device trials. So we'll work primarily with cable operators to test new devices as they're manufacturing them. So if they're going to roll out a new cable box to some population, we'll start with 200 people, work with them to sort of debug, find issues, make sure that the video quality is good, things like that, before they start delivering it to thousands of customers. And then we do new device monitoring. So after a company has certified a new TV or a new Blu-ray player, eventually it's going to show up in a store. We don't actually know when that might happen. And so we're always kind of on the lookout for those devices finally coming online, and then paying extra attention to their metrics to ensure that they're still working well. Because all the devices are certified, but after that point, things start changing. Our code changes. The partners update their firmware, so you always kind of need to just keep paying attention to those things to make sure that the reliability stays high. And then we also just collaborate with partner engineering, which is the organization that works directly with the manufacturers to build the devices, and then other teams in Netflix, just to make sure that they're always kind of thinking about making the devices sort of log data better, and just thinking about some of the issues that we run into in the field. What's happened? So here's just a few tools that we use. This is a tool called Big Data Portal. I don't think this is open source, but I think it may have been mentioned in a few of our tech blog posts. The quick description of it is just a SQL query interface, but it's intended for big data environments, and it interacts with Presto, Hive, Spark, Redshift, things like that, and kind of aggregates it all into one interface, and then also lets you view ETL jobs and browse schemas and things like that. So if we need to do any kind of ad hoc querying that we typically do after an alert has been fired, or we've run into a dashboard that we need to get more information out of, we'll probably use Big Data Portal. This is a picture of Atlas. So like I said, this is a time series database and graphing framework. And then this is I think we just call this Atlas UI or dashboards. It essentially lets you make lots of Atlas queries and graphs and then aggregate them together into large views. So we use lots of these to sort of get a quick overview of various metrics on a single device or a single area of the system. So I'm just going to run through a quick example of this is mostly a real incident that happened. So this is from an email alert that we got one morning that basically shows that this metric, contacts per 10K, so that's customer support contacts per 10,000 users. So it spiked up one day, basically. And immediately upon getting this, we went to look at this metric that we call SPS, which is start plays per second. This is a metric that many teams at Netflix use. This basically lets us know that people are continuing to start new streams. If this goes down dramatically, that means there's something big is wrong. So we went to look at this for this device, and everything was fine. So we didn't know exactly what was going on. In the same email, we flagged these outliers for multiple devices. We noticed that another device also had a similar spike. And those two devices, it turned out, were both fairly old, and they also ran the 3.x version of our SDK. So there was some commonality there that likely indicated maybe this issue was just isolated to that version. So we had this, but we still didn't really know what was wrong. We knew people were calling in, but we didn't know what the issue was. So we then went to Big Data Portal to write a query to try to figure out what was happening. It turns out we have a data source that lets us basically look at the records of customer calls and then correlates that back to actual customer IDs. So we can start going into actual logs to read log records and things like that. So we ran that to get a specific customer ID. And then we moved over to another tool that we have, which is called Argus, which kind of acts like a huge aggregator for various log sources that we have to give you a pretty detailed record of what a customer is doing. And once we can do this, we can really try to understand when an error appears, like what was the customer actually doing. So using a combination of Argus and Big Data Portal, we were kind of able to narrow it down to this specific error. We don't necessarily know what this meant or which system this was yet, but we knew that this was the error. And so you can see these counts on the side. That's basically the number of errors that we saw on that day. And then it ended up being broken out by different errors for the United States and Canada. Based on this, we knew, so it has this URL, API global.netflix.com. That is associated with a specific team here called Edge. We basically knew, well, we know that this team Edge will either own this or they'll know the downstream service that may be responsible for the error here. So the next step was to actually go to the Edge team. And so most teams here at Netflix run Slack channels where you can essentially go and talk to them about their services. If you're maybe using their code or if it's broken or if you have a production issue, you go there and ask them for help. Each team usually has an on-call member that's kind of responsible for responding to these issues. So once we went there, we were able to determine that an update had been made to a service that they owned. It was actually only rolled out to 25% of instances to actually test the impact of the code change. They didn't notice the impact because they were mainly looking at a very high level across sort of that 81 million user base. And in fact, incremented the rollout to 50% the next day because they thought everything was fine. We're looking at a sort of more granular level, and we're able to see the issue occurring on these very low volume devices that are older. Once we identified that, very easy, just roll the change back. We can then observe that the errors start going down, customer service calls go down, and then my team will provide them all the context that we have for that issue, basically, so that they can resolve it. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, for letting us know what it's like to do some site reliability engineering on the device side. It's definitely, it's got its own set of challenges. Next up, we have Jonah Horowitz coming up to talk about Production Ready, which is a program that we run here at Netflix. I'm not going to say any more since his talk is about just that. So I'm going to set that in present mode for you. Should be all set.
Awesome. Hey, how's everyone doing? So, last week, the availability for Netflix was 99.895%. If you were one of our developers and I told you that number, you wouldn't really have any way to take ownership of it, you know. Great. Collectively, the 1,300 developers at Netflix and the services that they've written contributed together to a not awesome, but not terrible availability number. So, like you said, I'm Jonah. I'm on the site reliability engineering team here called CORE, or the Cloud Operations Reliability Engineering. We are the last line of defense at Netflix for customer issues. We think of ourselves as defending the customer experience. So, so let me just talk a little bit about the Netflix architecture. So this is a subset of the service graph that runs Netflix. There are hundreds of microservices that are written by dozens of teams all throughout the company, and each team is responsible for their own microservice. As you can see, that it's a loosely connected graph. There are some services that are hit more than others, but ultimately, teams have to be responsible for their own service, but they aren't always necessarily aware of what's going on in the entire ecosystem. So Core, as a team, has a bigger overview of what's going on. So the services call each other with a library called Hystrix. Hystrix is a wrapper around all of the inter-service API calls, so that when a service has an either successful or unsuccessful API call, that's reported into Atlas, the metrics database that talking about earlier. So, like this, service A tries to talk to service B, and if it gets a 200, a successful response code back, most of the services use a RESTful HTTP interface, then it's considered a success. If it's something other than a 200, it's probably a failure. And it can also be a failure if it's just a timeout, right? If you ask it for something and it never responds, then that's also a failure. So what we're able to do is take all of the microservices, all of their reports, and look at their upstream and downstream service calls, and then report that in a graph. So in this situation, we have two services, and this is their availability independently, like just for this service, how well it responded to upstream requests from other services. So the top one, you can see, this is the last 13 weeks of data. So these are weekly averages. And you can see that for the most part, they're doing 4 nines, but the top one had some problems about 6 weeks ago, and the bottom one had some problems around the same time, but they've both gotten better since then. And so these service owners can actually worry not about like how well is Netflix doing overall. I mean, not that they don't worry about that, but they do worry about how well is their service and how reliable is their service. This is another graph that shows the relationship of two services, just only two services to each other. The service, this is a dependent service, And you can see that it had an outage a few days ago. And the gray line is just how many requests per second it was doing. So at that time, the upstream service had to figure out what to do. In this case, it failed back to an alternate sort of statically configured fallback. But if this was a service that was required for Netflix for streaming, customers would have an issue. Which brings us to production ready. So production ready, the idea is there's a list of things that we've seen different teams do across the entire company that make it less likely that they're going to have a failure or not be available to their other customers. So we started thinking about production ready has a number of components, and some of these I borrowed from Susan Fowler at Uber. For a service to be production ready, it has to be reliable. That means Chaos Monkey needs to be enabled. It needs to have automated deployment pipelines. We have a system here that does our production releases. It's called Spinnaker. When you configure a service in Spinnaker, you can configure it with an automated deployment pipeline so that each time you release code to production, it's done in a standardized way. You're not copying and pasting out of a wiki page or something to release your service to production. If it's automated, it's much more consistent, and so your service is going to be more reliable. One of the features of the automated pipelines is automated canary analysis. So this allows you to actually create a small test cluster that takes a certain percentage of your traffic, and then you compare the metrics for that small test cluster to the metrics generated by your main cluster and see if there's a large variation. And if there is, you can fail the pipeline. So you basically say, based on the score coming out of canary analysis, allow the pipeline to continue or stop and fail out and email the developer. Service has to be scalable. So we use two types of scaling here. We have proactive and reactive auto-scaling. Proactive auto-scaling is based on yesterday and the last few weeks' trend of how many servers you needed at this time of day. Let's make sure you always have that number of servers. Reactive auto-scaling is when proactive auto-scaling fails and you don't have enough servers to meet the demand, then we use just the standard AWS with CloudWatch metrics to auto-scale your service up. Performance. So automated canary analysis comes in here too. If the throughput or latency of your service has gone down significantly since your last release, you're probably not going to want to release that code to production. So again, automated canary analysis. Making sure you're on the proper instance type. Is the instance type well served to your service? Are you wasting Netflix money by running C38XLs on a service that only needs 100 megs of memory? Or alternately, are you constraining your service on memory or CPU when you could actually do better with a different instance type? Along with that goes well-tuned garbage collection and things like how many threads you're launching for Apache and Tomcat. Finally, your service has to be monitored. That means high-quality alerts that look at things like upstream and downstream failure percentages, your latency for your upstream services, and your 99th and 95th percentile latency, not just your average, so that you have a better idea of maybe you have some outliers. We often also monitor, like, what is the worst and best response time in your cluster, and are they really far away from each other? Finally, dashboards. So when you're having a problem with your service, are you able to quickly troubleshoot it? Having good dashboards is absolutely critical for understanding whether or not your service is performing. And then also when you're monitoring releases, it's really useful to have good dashboards to show if things have gone off the rails. When we first started Prod Ready, we reached out to the very most critical services at Netflix, the services that if they're not running, Netflix stops working entirely. Once we sort of worked through this checklist with those teams, we worked on some of the other smaller teams, but we had trouble gaining traction. So we're now moving to a new engagement model where we're having an office hours and we're opening it up to everyone at Netflix. Every team who wants to make their service more reliable can come and work with our team to help them do that. We're leveraging resources across the entire operations engineering organization, which is about 70 people. We're going to make sure that if you want to do garbage collection tuning, there's someone on the performance team who can sit down with you and make sure that you have good garbage collection. Or if you want to work on your deployment pipelines, there's someone on the Spinnaker team who can sit down and help you with those deployment pipelines. Finally, we wrote a tool called Drill Sergeant. And what this does is it looks at every service every day and evaluates it based on whether or not it's meeting some of our production-ready guidelines. There's some things we can check automatically, like deployment pipelines, which operating system you're running, whether or not you have canary analysis enabled, whether or not you're using Chaos Monkey in all of the regions, as well as some manual checks. It's really hard to say if someone has good alerts in an automated fashion, but a good engineer can look at a set of alerts and tell you pretty quickly whether or not you're monitoring the right things. So alerts, dashboards, your auto-scaling rules, although we'd like to automate that, and also Java, Tomcat, and Apache tuning. Those are things we'd like to automate, but we're not quite there yet. It produces a score like this. This is actually just a tab in that microservice availability report that I was showing earlier. And it shows your trend line over the past several weeks on how your service is doing across all of the production-ready criteria. So that's it on my talk. I'm Jonah, and the open source tools I mentioned are available at netflix.github.io. Netflix is always hiring. Also, I'm giving a talk tomorrow at Velocity Conference in their Ignite round at 7 o'clock, and it's free at Santa Clara Convention Center. So if you want to come see me try and squeeze a completely different talk into 5 minutes, come see me there.
Cool. Thank you, Jonah, for talking about the macro level view that we have on the core SRE team of the whole microservice ecosystem, and also going into some of that production-ready tidbits. Next up is Bryan Tolson. He's a member of the team as well, and he's going to talk about a PM in an SRE.
Good afternoon, good evening. Hey, I'm Bryan, as I said. How many people here are SREs, just so I can get a good feel? I know it's an SRE meetup. I expect most people. Okay, cool. How many people are PMs? 1, 2, 5, 4. Okay. I am an SRE and a PM, and I bet you are too. And that applies to everybody here in this room. So I think we all understand what PM means, but I wanted to cover it. So for those who don't, can we all just say it on the count of 3? 1, 2, 3.
Product manager.
Awesome. It applies to every single one of you who said the right answers. PM means a lot of different things, even some things that are not real. Perfect manager. Hey. Okay, Blake excluded. But for the purpose of this talk and really the focus of SRE here, Netflix, I wanted to talk about 2 of the PM roles that are listed here, and that's product management, program management. We treat both of them differently, but they require a lot of the same skills. We try to use them to accomplish a lot of the same goals. Really quickly, I'll breeze over what I think of as the difference between the 2. Projects are generally focused on a specific goal. So here we have a few different goals that we keep in mind. We know where they're at, but we're really focused on a singular project to really focus on that one goal. And projects are generally bound by time and by money. That's the traditional thinking. Here at Netflix, and for the rest of this talk, I'm not really going to focus on the money side of things, but I will talk about kind of how we focus on making sure that we go through this project management phase really quickly. So we'll keep time on the page for now. Programs, on the other hand, take a lot longer, generally because they have a wider scope. In this case, you can see here, it's got a bunch of projects inside that target. And because they take a little bit longer, we see that things change over time. If things didn't change, we probably wouldn't be interested in working in the jobs we have. So as program manager, when you're putting that hat on, we're constantly thinking, how can we set up a program that's going to work over the long haul, and we'll be able to adapt to changes as they come along. And as with any government program, if you call it a program, you get an infinite budget. So I really wanted to highlight this. PM work is a key responsibility of all SREs. How many people feel this way? A few? Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you for the support. It's very important to us being able to accomplish goals that we have when we realize opportunities. You know, PMs are very uniquely positioned to, or I'm sorry, SREs are very uniquely positioned to be able to identify opportunities in the system that other engineers aren't able to do. Most software engineers that work on our features are really focused very directly on releasing those features very rapidly. SREs, we get to see all the nuts and bolts and how they fall apart and which ones are loose and which ones need work, right? So I really think that our ability to focus on the project management and the program management side of what we do is how we get to move the needle in our favor. So a little bit about how we do project management here at Netflix. One of the things that we do is we focus each incident and we think about each incident as a project. That means you're thinking about what resources do we have available? What goals do we want to accomplish? Usually our goal during an incident is singular and it never changes. Mitigate customer impact. As Jonah said and other people have said, we're constantly focused on our customers. That is our primary objective and that doesn't move. But we still have constraints. We need to get it done quickly. We need to figure out who all we can organize and coordinate to get the job done fast. And communication, all this other good stuff. So, you know, the process of going through a project could be very rapid. An example would be earlier today, actually, just a few hours before this meetup, we had a pretty nasty outage here at Netflix. Al from our team took that incident. He was our on-call representative at the time, and he took that incident and he had to put on his project management hat. I'm not sure if he knew it at the time, but that's what he did. He had to think about who all needs communication about this impact. Who all do we need to tell right now? Which teams need to be involved? Where do we have that communication happening? Do we do it in Slack? Do we pull everybody into a room? There's lots of moving pieces. He pulled in some teams, and then we realized it was related to another team, so we have to go grab them and pull them into the room. There's lots of coordination happening. And I think when we think about project management traditionally, you've probably seen graphs where you have your planning and your scoping, and then you move on to execution and monitoring and controlling. All that stuff's still happening, but it's just happening very, very, very quickly. So in this particular case, it was just a mere 30 minutes or so. All that stuff was done. Our customer impact was mitigated. And now we'll probably have other projects spun up to figure out how we make sure that thing doesn't happen again in the future. One of the incidents that I wanted to talk about here today was our test environment. So Tuesday, this is a while back, but it's still very relevant to this talk. Tuesday, July 29th, 2014, 1:10 p.m. Everything was great. We were talking about how these new buildings were going to be built and they're going to be awesome. The sun was shining. At 1:11 p.m., this happened. Test environment doesn't hurt customers. Why did we get involved? We're focused on customers. What we realized with this particular incident pretty quickly was that there was a piece of code that was causing the issue that was shared amongst the test environment and the production environment. We were at risk of this exact thing that took our entire test environment down happening in production. So our on-call representative for this particular issue put on his project management hat and said, what do we need to do? Well, test environment went down. Do we need to tell PR? Probably not. Do we need to get it fixed? Yes. Who can fix it? What's wrong? So we dig down, we find out what the problem is, and then there's a concerted effort amongst multiple groups of people to figure out what is it that we're going to fix. That got done pretty quickly and very easily. But now, here's the thing. This particular incident was caused by a piece of code. We call it our base AMI. It was a piece within our base AMI that was used for all applications throughout Netflix. Pretty scary. Our core services went down that day. So services that are required for other microservices to work and you come up and take traffic went down that day, and we had trouble bringing them up. So our on-call representative put his PM hat on and he said, okay, we've got our base AMI fixed. Now I need to coordinate all the work that has to be done to bring up our core services. We can't do it all at once, so we have to piece that out and get everything done in an order. After that was done, our core services were back up and running. We still have a long tail of, I think at the time, we're at over 700 services now. At the time, I think we were around 400 or 500. We still have work to be done to make sure everybody updates, or else this could potentially still happen. So he went back to his desk, he wrote a little script, and he said, I'm going to let my script do some of this PM work. We checked to see who was upgrading to this new fixed update, and we would communicate with the people who had not updated. Now, does it stop there? No, of course not. Has anybody run an incident review? Okay, cool, thank you. As you know, when you're running an incident review, sometimes you run across things you wouldn't expect. In this particular case, we had a realization, a very scary realization, that core service that I mentioned, that we had trouble bringing up, was unable to come up without itself being present first. That was a problem. That's another opportunity. So the PM work doesn't just start and end with an incident that happens like what happened earlier today. I kind of view it as a whole project management cycle happened right there within that room today. But in this case, it went on, and we have remediation project work that takes a long time, and this was a long tail to get everybody updated. So that's an incident. We also focus our project work around incident trends, right? So you have an incident, okay, maybe you've done a little bit of work to try to make sure it doesn't happen again, and then you see another team has just run into the same problem. That's something we do see periodically. It's something our team strives not to let happen, but it does happen. So one example, it can be a technical thing or a non-technical thing. On the technical side, we've seen incidents where, for instance, it's bid us multiple times that a particular service or multiple services we're deploying in a way that would affect all of our customers at once, instead of just a small subset. So when we see these opportunities, we have to put our project management hats on and figure out how do we share that message with everyone? How do we educate people on how not to let that happen? What improvements do the tools do we need to make sure that people don't run into that thing again? We think a lot about how do we make it hard to do the wrong thing? How do we make it easier to do the right thing? So one of the incident trends that we discovered is that a lot of engineers come to work for Netflix from other organizations, and because of our model mentioned earlier, where every engineer owns their own service, well, what we do is we pretty much place all engineers on call for their service. It's up to them how they want to rotate through their on-call schedules with their team members, but everybody gets a shot at it. And what we realize is that not everybody's used to that. So we get software developers from other companies who may not be used to being on call, and this was an area of opportunity that presented itself that was not technical. This is a human problem. So when you get paged, when your service goes down, what do you do? With over 700 services and dozens of teams, you can imagine people don't necessarily get paged all the time. This is an infrequent occurrence. So we put together a plan. We put together a project called Failing Well. This is a term that's been popularized by other people in the past, but we use this term to basically spread the word around when we fail, here's what we need to do to make sure that we do that as well as possible. So what are the expectations for you when you're on call? When you get paged, where do you go to join the conversation? We put together a presentation. We went around, probably spoke with around 4 or 5 dozen engineering teams that were already existing here at Netflix. And we also embedded this talk within our new hire orientation, our new hire engineering boot camp, if you will. So anybody who's going to be developing will go through this education and be better prepared for the future. So that's a little bit about project management. On the program side, honestly, the best thing we have going in terms of programs right now is our Prod Ready effort. Our overarching goal, that big target with lots of projects inside of it, is to improve availability. And a lot of the pieces that Jonah talked about just a moment ago came out of identifying projects from our incident trends that aggregated together could form more into a program when we leverage all the resources that we have here, and we can have multiple projects going on at the same time. So we feel like we're able to move the needle a little further with this type of an effort than we would be if we were to take each one and just focus solely on that thing. So us as a core team identify this opportunity that's much broader than we can alone take care of. We engage with our entire operations organization and turn this into a program that really can move the needle on availability. The skills, I talked earlier a little bit about the skills around this and how it fits in within SRE. I think project management, program management, roughly like 90% of what a project manager does is communicate. The other 10% is filled with things like planning, scoping, maybe report building, analyzing that data, that sort of stuff. So we look a lot to our SREs when we're hiring to make sure they have the skills to do all this organization, to communicate very well, to really think about each incident as they handle it. What could be done at a larger scale to make sure we're moving the needle in the direction that we want? So again, I'll say, I'm an SRE, I'm a PM, and I know you are too. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. Okay, so that is actually all we have presentation-wise. So what I'm going to suggest at this point is everyone that spoke come up on stage, and we'll just do an ad hoc Q&A, answer any questions you have. And if we're out of questions, we can move on to some more drinking and hanging out and talking. So,
All in favor of beer?
yeah, all. Yep.
One.
So yeah, any questions?
Do you find SRE in like a microservices world, you're acting more like a one-man knock at times? Because it's not, you like an SRE here is responsible for, it sounds like sort of an overarching, the service itself, but you've got so many microservices teams that have their own, it sounds like they don't have SREs themselves, but they have on-call rotations.
Right. Some of the core services actually do embed folks that are more SRE minded within their own teams to kind of help with that effort. I think our team is kind of best positioned to understand the overall architecture of Netflix and help people understand how they can fit into that really well. It also helps that we sit within operations engineering, and we're essentially like 10 feet from all the people who build the tools that our engineers use. So they're constantly releasing new features, new updates, and it is kind of a gap sometimes for engineers to be able to learn about these things and adopt them. So we help as much as possible to educate engineers so that they can own their own services effectively.
And even to piggyback that answer a little bit, I've worked in a NOC in the past, and that experience was a lot of like looking at dashboards, a lot of reactionary stuff, a lot of doing in my mind, very easy run booky kind of stuff. I would say we're completely the opposite of that. We don't have any dashboards that are up on the screen that we're staring at. We really fine tune our alerts to make sure that they let us know when there's a problem and we're not out there hunting. We also do a lot of proactive work, a lot of R&D, a lot of tool development, things along those sides. So I hear what you're saying about the NOC thing, because we're not necessarily going in and fixing the code in depth and then doing the deploy. There is a lot of that triage element, but it's not a lot of like cleaning disk space and stuff like that. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Me personally, I've never fixed a production issue. I don't do that.
But you pull the right people to make it happen.
But I do, yeah, but we coordinate the efforts necessary to take that on.
Cool. Any other questions?
A question about the device reliability. The question is, you guys don't have internal testing on the different version of SDK before all the code being released in those devices?
No, we do. So every device that goes out, there's a whole separate org actually that works on certification, and each of the manufacturers.
Afterwards. So say, in your case, that you have incident, right? And then certain people draw a certain code.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, when that code being rolled out, they actually testing on the device themselves? Means do you have like a full device always looking?
Yeah.
And
So
you actually know the problems before they actually roll out?
So I think my manager Ollie's here also. He may have more context than I do. So the teams that develop that code and are constantly releasing it, we have labs here at Netflix where we have lots of these devices ready. I think we test them on a large number of them. We don't get to all of them. And there's also changes that they make in their own firmware that cause these issues as well.
Yes, a lot of times you'll see when these devices are sent out, a lot of TVs and stuff like that, after they've been out in the field for a month or so, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's really hard to get the company to go back and fix that because it's just so expensive. They're going by small margins. So you can test as much as you can, but once it gets out there, you start doing firmware updates, and there's multiple apps that are running and updating at the same time. And yeah,
You don't really control that, is what you're saying.
it's exactly.
You know,
We do have a certification program that we work with a lot of device manufacturers to try and apply some best practices to try and make sure that it runs as reliable. So I think taking up your space, but
I mean, and that outage was like a severe edge case. So like it was just a very small fraction of the number of deployed devices. So like thousands of deployed devices, thousands of different kinds of deployed devices. And that was just an edge case that caught a very small number of them.
Yeah, the idea is just if you catch it before it went out, instead of it went out and then it caused all the outage and then trying to figure out what that is.
Yeah, once it's out in the field, challenging.
Just one more, do you have a well-defined, like how long are you gonna retire this SDK 3.0? You need support for 10 years?
I have the same question.
Great question.
I don't think there is a well-defined.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I mean, right now we try to support all the devices that are out there. That
Okay.
I have a Blu-ray player that I probably bought about 8 years ago, and it better play Netflix one.
I mean, one of the only things you can use an iPad 1 for is Netflix. Like literally nothing else works on it at this point.
Cool. Any other questions?
So you mentioned something about production ready and Chaos Monkey to be enabled.
Yeah.
So do you emulate or simulate a production environment in your test environment, or how does that work? Like how can you simulate a production before it goes out?
I don't know if I can answer that exact question. So we have a test environment, and we expect our engineers to test things before they release code to production.
Right.
But we don't. I don't think we run Chaos Monkey in test. Correct me if I'm wrong.
We run it in prod.
Yeah. So,
We inject faults into our production environment so we can learn from it.
so
So then you would run it before it goes GA.
no, you run it after it's GA. We run Chaos Monkey all the time.
Yeah.
And I part of my talk tomorrow, it's a sneak preview, is that even if we didn't run Chaos Monkey, like Amazon is a little bit of Chaos Monkey. I mean, so is Google and so is Microsoft. Like the truth is that when you're relying upon a third-party hosting provider, there's going to be times when they're going to have issues and you're going to have to deal with that. Chaos Monkey is like setting an environment in which all of our developers are used to having their nodes die in production on a regular basis. So they don't have a choice. They have to write their code so it can withstand failure. Not because we're going to kill it with Chaos Monkey. Like that's the kind of failure that we can kind of manage a little bit. But it's the unexpected failure, and by running Chaos Monkey every day, they're prepared for the unexpected failures that happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, when we first rolled it out, it was opt-out, and we changed that model. So now if you opt, actually,
So it used to be opt-in, now it's opt-out.
whatever it is, it's on for everybody, or else if something goes wrong, there's a discussion.
He meant it the other way around. People,
Like
people used to opt in, now you have to tell
Always
us.
on is the better word.
So one question around the project management.
Yes.
Like, was there any case where you had to say no to features in favor of reliability or availability, like because you need to?
There's a
ensure
constant
that-
struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when I think back really far, I've been here quite some time, and when I think back to Christmas Eve 2012. Yeah. Did anybody else just cry too? We had an outage that lasted a considerable amount of time. I think it was like a full day or right around there. And from there, yeah, features went on hold. At that point, we started large efforts that's I think what kicked off our active effort so that we could fail one complete region to another. And at that point, all engineering teams were backing this idea that we need to put effort there. I do think, though, that there is a balance. You're constantly weighing the advantages and disadvantages. I mean, features do bring in customers, but reliability does as well. So it's a constant battle. Not battle, but a constant balance.
And I think by each service team building, deploying, and maintaining their environments, they start to bubble up the reliability engineering things, or they're more focused on the things that will help the reliability because they're on the hook, right? If it goes down, they're going to get paged. They don't want to get woken up in the middle of the night. So it really kind of helps drive their backlog to prioritize reliability.
I think it's worth mentioning really quickly too, is that like we have a real freedom and responsibility culture. And so we don't, as a team, like the core team doesn't tell teams that they can't release features. Like that is entirely the microservice teams make the decision on the balancing, the amount of work they put into reliability and the amount of work they put into features. But they're also on the hook. Like they're the ones who get paged when their service goes down. We don't get paged and then page them. Like that page goes directly to that service team.
There's no central release team and there's no central QA team. So everybody pushes on their own schedule. So our largest edge service pushes once every 24 hours. They have a very good canary process.
Yep.
Question on the Failing Well
Oh, yeah.
program. Can you just talk a little bit about what sort of areas you cover?
So the Failing Well presentation was kind of thought of as a high-level intro to how we fail here at Netflix. So I created some, we as a team created some brief slides to talk about some of the Hystrix stuff that Jonah talked about, how services talk to one another, how we can create good fallbacks in place and, set your auto-scaling rules, that sort of stuff. But we put most of the focus on the human side of it. Most of the focus was like, hey, if you're on call, please have your phone with you and your computer with you and some internet and maybe like a power cord or two. Those types of things help. When you're paged, here's where we're going to be. When we page you, this is where we're hoping that you're going to join. We had a wide range of people saying like, well, I joined quickly. 2.5 hours is not quick to me. So we set expectations. What does that look like? That's kind of what we focused on, is a lot of expectations.
We're just starting to get add developers who are new to it to the on-call rotation and trying to come up with like a similar set of education and awareness of responsibilities. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in the back corner.
Maybe you handle issues involving security, reports of, say, security vulnerabilities, code reviews around security, and how that impacts your availability, the integrity of your services.
So we actually have a really healthy sized security team, multiple teams in fact, and they cover different aspects of our services and signups and DRM and all of that stuff, the encoding. So all the different aspects. We work really closely with them when it comes to how they handle their incidents and how we handle ours. So yeah, there's some commonality there, right? Because when things go crazy, whether it's a security reason or whether it's just a service going down. So yeah, we typically work really closely with that side just to kind of keep our incident response kind of model and tightly aligned.
I didn't hear the original question, but I wanted to add something anyways.
Okay. Well, so I hope I heard your question right. It was how does like security type incidents affect?
You handle a security incident. Does that come basically through this? Does each team have an embedded security entity in that?
Yeah.
Is there
So I'll add this.
security team that handles code reviews, etc.
Gotcha. So not embedded. Teams can choose to staff up accordingly if they want. But we kind of like how the core SRE team has this macro view. We have a few different security teams that again focus on specific areas and do consulting, build tools that people can easily plug into and get all the goodness out of.
I'll just add this as I've seen things transform. Robert here works on a very unique team that's dedicated to solving issues with in-field devices that have been out there for a while. Maybe they're new devices. Some of them have been out there for a long time. This team as a whole is only about 1.5 years old. Is that about right? 1.5 years, 2 years old. And it was just us identifying an opportunity to really focus narrowly on this thing that wasn't getting as much attention because we're always focused on what's next and what's newest and what's hottest. And security was no different. Security was constantly working on how do we make this thing more secure and what are the features. Very recently, I'd say about 1 year ago, they did a very similar thing that happened with Robert's team, and they created a team that was dedicated solely to incident response. So we do have a team, when there are issues, when we identify issues, their job is very similar to ours, but from a security standpoint. We get involved when we feel like the business itself might be at risk, or there is a risk or to impact to our customers. That's when our team would get engaged.
And there has been twice in the past year where we've had a security issue in production, like a cert issue or something. And the security team actually steps in and they run the incident. They take it over, they man the room, and we go to bed, right? I mean, if it's their area of specialty, they'll just run it to completion and we'll sort of hand it off.
Yeah.
If it's pure security.
Pure security. Go ahead, your question.
Yes. One of the most impressive things for Netflix is the amount of networking traffic you guys put out. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you work with networking operations and if you coordinate with them or to look together the signal they get.
Can we punt that to Dave?
Yeah.
You're standing there.
Calling the bench. Dave.
Dave, also on the core team.
Yep.
I'm mostly their fault. So the question is around the large Netflix impact on the available bandwidth in the internet and how we handle that. Go ahead. I understand your question correctly.
Yeah, internal wise is also how the SRE team works with networking operation teams to make.
Sure. So we have a separate group that we call our CDN group that focuses on all of those IX connections, the peering connections, the physical hardware that we have distributed around the world that delivers all of the video bits. So one point of clarification for anyone who doesn't know, when you're talking to Netflix, none of your video bits come from Amazon. All of that comes from our own purpose-built CDN. And that's where this large impact to available network bandwidth comes from. And we have a team that specializes not only in setting up and monitoring and coordinating those kinds of things, but also handling issues. And they're a highly available, highly redundant team. So they are, for us, one of our specialty teams that we go to and we use as a resource when we believe that the customer impact may be coming from some portion of the internet, some ASN that they connect to, or we have some IX stack somewhere that's behaving in an odd fashion. We've also architected things in such a way to where those kinds of failures don't impact our customers very often at all. So if you imagine when you press that play button on whatever your favorite device is, our system actually hands out to you up to 4 or 5 different places scattered geographically on the internet where you can go get that data. So even if the primary stack that you're talking to suddenly implodes and can transfer exactly 0 bits from that point forward, your device already knows where to switch to. So part of the reliability from a customer experience standpoint comes from building the device SDK in such a way to where it's very resilient to some portion of the internet somewhere going away. So in some ways, we don't have to deal with it because it hardly impacts our customers when that portion of Netflix goes down because it is in itself so highly redundant. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, maybe we can take one more question and then answer more questions. Yep.
I have a question about the how you guys can identify the specific commit the code change from the customer code. So if you got some customer code,
So this is a question for you, Robert. He's saying when customer calls go up, how do you find out what changed? What broke? What broke?
Nothing ever breaks, by the way. Most of our presentations are a series of cat pictures that we've been looking at that week.
So there's a few tools that we use to do that. One is we track firmware versions that our partners when they update them. And so we have a very detailed database of the history of their rollout. So we can track if they do sort of their own canary deploys of new firmware. So we'll see that like some new TV, 5% of those TVs are now on a new firmware. They may be the only ones having an issue. So we're able to track and report on that when we're investigating. We also have an internal service here at Netflix called Kronos. That's an event tracking service. And basically when any service is deployed, especially if it's using Spinnaker, which is our sort of standardized deployment mechanism, that deployment is logged in Kronos. So when we know something's gone on, if it started happening at 7:05 a.m. or something, we can go look in Kronos. We can go look in our firmware tool. We can see did the version change around that time, basically.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. We still have another hour. Feel free to get some more drinks, get some more food, hang outside, hang out in here, chat it up, and feel free to come to us if you have any questions. We're happy to answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.